Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Leaders for Democracy Spring 2018 webinar. We're going to get started, and I'll hand it over to Chris Carson. Chris?
Thank you, Jessica. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Leaders for Democracy call. I'm Chris Carson, President of the Board of Directors of the League of Women Voters of the United States, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. But before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. First, everyone will be placed on mute for the direction of the call. And we're recording the call and we'll make it available, so please don't hesitate to share it with friends. And a final note, if you have questions during the call, please either email Emily Yost at eyost@lwv.org or use the chat box function in the webinar software at the right-hand corner. Well, welcome to our current Leaders for Democracy members. As a member myself, I know my financial support goes directly to supporting our campaign to make democracy work. Without you, we would not be able to do all the work you will hear about today, and I thank you. I also want to welcome our special guests today who are considering joining the ranks of Leaders for Democracy with a commitment of $1,000 or more. At the end of our call, you'll hear more about our signature philanthropic program from fellow board member Kim Louth. As you hear more about how the League is making democracy work, we hope you will be inspired to invest in our programs through a donation. Well, the 2016 election was one of the most divisive campaigns in our history and elevated our nation's consciousness to the fact that the American system of government is not a fully representative democracy. More than 100 million eligible voters did not cast a ballot, and millions more aren't even registered to vote. Since then, our nation has had an awakening, and people are engaging in our democracy, some for the first time ever. Across the country, we've seen a dramatic increase in participations in marches and civic demonstrations, and at the League, membership has increased over 21% in the last 2 years. People are looking toward the 2018 midterm election to see if voter participation increases, moving us toward that more fully representative democracy. But voting rights, as you know, are under attack. Across the country, legislatures are pushing laws that create obstacles to voting, including cutbacks on early voting, reduced poll hours, voter roll purging, and strict voter identification requirements. And as we all know, these laws strategically disenfranchise people of color, senior citizens, and young people, driving an even larger wedge into the representative nature of our voting electorate. At the League, we continue to be tireless advocates for voters. In our 98th year, we are the strongest on-the-ground voting group in the country. We register, educate, protect, and mobilize in all 50 states and in over 750 local communities. We are the voice that many turn to for fair, thorough, and accurate information about key issues in our communities and across the nation. Today, you will hear from League staff, including Maggie Bush, Programs and Outreach Director, and Jessica Jones-Caporal, Interim Senior Director of Advocacy. They will tell you about the many programs the League is coordinating across the country to register, educate, and protect. We will also hear from Marge Ahrens, immediate past president of the Kansas State League, who recently testified in the League of Women Voters versus Kobach case that challenges Kansas documentary proof of citizenship law. But before I turn it over to Maggie, a reminder, you're all on mute, and if you have questions, please either email Emily at eyost@lwv.org or use the chat box function in the right-hand corner. Maggie Bush is the Programs and Outreach Director and has more than a decade of political advocacy and strategic communications experience. She currently manages the League's nationwide voter registration programs, which have resulted in hundreds of thousands of voters being registered in major election years. She has authored several publications and training manuals relating to voting rights, voter registration, and youth voter engagement. Maggie.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to mention that in addition to being a longtime supporter of the League and our national president, Chris herself is a respected national expert on many voting rights issues, in particular redistricting reform, which is, of course, a big issue in the news right now and something that you'll hear about from my colleague Jessica in a few minutes. So thank you, Chris. As Chris alluded to a moment ago, if did not vote was a candidate on the 2016 ballot in the U.S. presidential election, he or she would have won by a landslide. Unfortunately, despite the many, many gains made to increase electoral participation in this country, many of which you'll hear about today, still turnout nationally was only about 55%. Registration and voter turnout among particular underrepresented groups of voters, the very groups of voters most affected by voter suppression, the very groups that we at the League are working hardest to engage, was even lower in terms of voter registration and participation. There are many critical reasons for that we'll go into over the next several minutes. But improving these numbers, making sure that this graph does not look this way after the 2020 election is key to the long-term safety and protection of our democracy and the health of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the League is doing on voter registration to prepare for the midterms, particularly among young voters, new citizens, and through some major national programs, including National Voter Registration Day, which hopefully some of you on the phone have heard of. The League's voter registration activities are among the things we're best known for. Many of you have likely helped register voters yourselves, perhaps with a local League team, or seen us out with our clipboards in your community. We've been doing that for many, many, many decades, and we're the largest grassroots voter registration in the country. As that largest voter registration organization, we've set some huge goals for ourselves. We've pledged to register 1 million people to vote by the time we reach 2020, which will also be the League's 100th anniversary year. And we are going about accomplishing that in some very specific ways. Bringing new people into our electorate, not just so that every young person and first-time voter has access to the ballot box, but to fundamentally alter the representational bias that exists in our communities, in our halls of power at the local, state, and national levels. To help overcome that representational bias, we want to bring new groups into the electorate and make sure everyone has the opportunity to register to vote, which is the critical entry point to long-term democratic participation. This year, we're registering tens of thousands of people online and on the ground, with a special focus on the groups that you see on your screen. One of the most powerful things we're doing, and personally one of my very favorite things that I get to do as a staff member here at the League, is our volunteer teams are visiting high schools, community colleges, and technical schools to register tens of thousands of young people for the very first time. Since 2010, that National Youth Voter Registration Program has registered tens of thousands of students across dozens of states. We've been able to support hundreds of local League volunteer teams in doing this critical work. This year, we've pledged just through this program to visit 400 schools. As of a couple of weeks ago, we've already hosted voter registration drives in more than 100 schools. And dozens of our leagues participated as well in the student walkouts over the last month and in the marches last weekend, leveraging what's of course, an intense moment of nationwide activism where young people are truly leading the way. We, of course, want to make sure that those young people, even as they're speaking out in important ways right now, also have the opportunity to register and vote to participate in primaries and in the general election in November. We carry out our youth voter registration work by providing pass-through grants So critical resources, training, and on-the-ground support that they need to get this work done. And also that they need to be able to get out the vote among these very young people they're registering for the primaries and in November. We know that the work we're doing is critical to reaching the nearly 50% of 18-year-olds who've never had the chance to register to vote. There are many reasons for that, but we know an often cited reason is because no one has ever asked them to register to vote. We are often the first line of folks giving young people, especially young people who don't go on to college, that opportunity to get engaged when no one else perhaps has ever asked them. Personally, not only do I have the privilege of managing this program as a longtime member of the national staff, I've done it myself as a local league volunteer, as I'm sure many of you on the phone have done. One of my first experiences registering voters was as a league volunteer in Arlington, Virginia, where I live, at a local high school. The first time I went to a high school, a student walked up to me and told me it was her 18th birthday that day. She wanted to register to vote, and she had the biggest grin on her face, and she had brought several of her friends over to our table with her. This young woman was excited to vote. She understood how important it was, and she needed the league to help her get there. I'll never forget her and the impact she made on me, and I know that many of our volunteers doing this work across the country feel the exact same way. But I wasn't only able to help that one young woman register to vote. That local league of mine visits that school, her school, every single year to make sure all the graduating seniors are registered. Thanks to that work, they've actually expanded their access so that the league now has exclusive access to visit every single high school in our county, meaning we're reaching thousands of young people every single year as they graduate and move on to other things. This is replicated over and over and over in our local communities because of the hard work that leagues are doing right now. The league is present. We're working consistently in communities to build relationships with school officials, build up our volunteer base of experts, and we're often the only organization with granted access to schools to go in because of our trusted reputation, and with the lasting power to do this, not only for the students turning 18 today, but for the next 5, 10, and 20 years. Of course, our powerful registration work isn't just stopping at the schools. To quickly tell you a little bit about the other registration work we're doing, we've just this week, in fact, launched our 2018 New Citizens Voter Registration Project. We're thrilled to be supporting leagues across the country as they go into naturalization ceremonies for new citizens and register new voters on the spot. Last year, we were able to support, through pass-through grants, 12 leagues who together registered more than 25,000 new Americans at more than 400 new citizen ceremonies across nationwide. This year, we have even bigger goals. We are confident that we'll reach at least 600 new citizen ceremonies by the end of the year. This program is ensuring that thousands of new Americans, literally moments after they take the oath of citizenship, have the opportunity to get registered thanks to the League. Again, as with schools, the League is often the only organization granted access to participate in these ceremonies in courthouses and at facilities that this Immigration Services uses for these ceremonies. We are the only organization trusted with the strong reputation we have to go in and register this critical group of new Americans as they become citizens. Many of our local teams have been doing this work for 30 or 40 years in their community. We have the reputation and the knowledge, and again, that committed volunteer base to get the job done. And I don't need to tell you that in today's political environment, with immigrant families under a larger microscope than ever before, certainly in my memory, our work has never been more critical. Finally, National Voter Registration Day and other major partnerships that we're working on to continue registering and reaching first-time voters, voters who have moved and need to update their voter registration, and so forth. For National Voter Registration Day, which will take place in September, we are a premier national partner and founding organizer of the day. We'll join thousands of organizations in September in getting the word out about the importance of voter registration and the fact that deadlines are coming up and folks must register to vote if they want to participate in the midterm elections. Last year, more than 350 League volunteer teams participated in National Voter Registration Day, which made us the single largest on-the-ground partner for the 6th year running. That's every single year that National Voter Registration Day has existed. So we are on track to yet again be the single largest on-the-ground partner, and are already working to recruit league teams and make sure they're ready to go on National Voter Registration Day. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about our voter education and mobilization work. Of course, our work doesn't stop at registration. We know we must increase the number of people actually making it to the polls and successfully casting a vote in order to, again, forge that more representative democracy. A major reason that many people give for not voting is a lack of good information. So we work to address that through many, many ways across our grassroots network. But by far, our most powerful tool is vote411.org, which I hope some of you are familiar with. This is our national voting resource that has empowered tens of millions of voters since 2006. Our goal for 2018 is to exceed the number of people who took advantage of Vote 411 in 2014, the last comparable midterm election year. And our aim is to reach 2 million voters through Vote 411 this year. On Vote 411 this year, we're going to have an unprecedented amount of content. Every single voter will be able to find a complete ballot of who's on their ballot, down through the state house level during the primary, as well as the general election. And in many, many more places, and in fact, in more than 30 states, every single voter living in that state will be able to find complete ballots down to some hyper-local levels. This is particularly important because we know that voters, especially young and first-time voters, cite a lack of information about who's on their ballot as a reason that they stay home on election day. So we're trying to combat that issue, as well as other key pieces of information that voters often don't have, and presenting it through one strong, unified national platform of information. Vote 411, the website, I encourage you to go visit it. It has 4 main features. First of all, we offer voter registration. Tens of thousands of voters register through Vote 411 every year, and that tool has become especially important as more and more states are moving online for voter registration. We have on Vote 411 up-to-date information about how voting works in every single state, including if a photo ID is required to vote, if voters have early voting options, when the voter registration deadline is, and other information that we know voters need to know. We have a nationwide polling place finder. We know that where to vote is another key question many voters have, especially if they've never voted before or have recently moved to a new area and don't know where their polling place is. And then, as I mentioned, we have an unprecedented level of candidate and ballot information. This gives candidates the opportunity to speak directly to voters in their own words, which has long been the League's approach to providing nonpartisan voter information. Our volunteers are putting in thousands and thousands of hours to compile these candidate statements on the key issues that matter most to voters right now. Again, we are often the only organization able to find this information, especially at the local level, and especially in a midterm election year, when many, many voters don't have great information about what and who they'll be voting for. So again, we're also providing information about hundreds of local debates, candidate debates that state and local leagues are hosting for voters in their communities this year. Vote 411 has information about all of those events as they're taking place so that voters can learn from the candidates themselves about what they stand for. And ultimately, the national platform that Vote 411 provides allows us to empower and protect the rights of voters in real time all year long, especially on election day itself, when we see our traffic spike to truly incredible levels as voters head to the polls and need to find good information fast. We're particularly excited, finally, to be expanding Vote 411 into the area of some powerful new partnerships this year, from newspapers, including the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the Idaho Statesman, to many nonprofit organizations and partners. We are building relationships to make sure that our allies in this fight are also providing good information to voters as they seek out that information. So that's a bit about our voter registration and education work. Now I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Jessica Jones-Caparol, for some more information about how we're protecting the vote. Jessica is the Interim Senior Director of Advocacy at the League. In this position, Jessica is working to deliver the League's message on Capitol Hill and across the country on our federal advocacy priorities through lobbying and the development of advocacy strategies. Jessica leads the League's volunteer lobby corps, who also work to deliver our message on Capitol Hill, and works on behalf of state and local leagues across the country on a variety of key advocacy issues. She's an expert on the League's policy positions and is working to implement many important grassroots campaigns right now. Jessica?
Thanks very much, Maggie. I'm excited to be here with you all today to talk about the advocacy work that the League is doing. And I'm honored to work with League members and my colleagues like Maggie and Chris and Marge and Kim every single day in order to protect our democracy. Before we get started, I wanted to pull up a map that shows a little bit about what's been going on around the country since 2010. Since the 2010 election, 23 states, which is nearly half of the country, has added new restrictions since the 2010 election. 13 states have made more restrictive voter ID laws. 11 states have passed laws that make it harder for citizens to register to vote. And 6 states have cut back early voting days and hours. Instead of protecting the right to vote, lawmakers have worked to put up barriers that prevent people from using their most basic right, the right to vote. After the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, which gutted key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, there were even more pieces of legislation filed. Without the key protections of the VRA, those states that were traditionally protected were allowed to pass discriminatory voting laws. And the League is working to break down these barriers by challenging them in the courts, and we're also working to pass and implement pro-voter reforms that ensure that elections across the country are free, fair, and accessible. Here at the League, we take a multi-pronged approach to our advocacy. We're fighting for good and against the bad in many ways. Through litigation, we work to fight for voters on many issues. The League is currently engaged in lawsuits challenging redistricting maps, voter ID laws, ensuring voter information is safe, and some other issues. We'll talk some today about the different cases that the League is involved in. The League is also lobbying lawmakers in Congress and the Trump administration. In the last year, we've worked to protect the Election Assistance Commission, disband the Pence-Kobach Commission, and lobby for legislation like the We the People Democracy Reform Act of 2017 and the Automatic Voter Registration Act of 2017. Finally, the over 700 leagues around the country are working in their local communities to protect, engage, and educate voters about upcoming elections while fighting back suppressive voting laws that threaten the right to vote. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the litigation efforts in the Supreme Court that the League has filed amicus briefs in. First is the case of Gill v. Whitford. This is a partisan gerrymandering case, and it challenges the state legislative maps drawn by the Wisconsin legislature. In 2010, the majority party in Wisconsin drew legislative maps that would ensure that their party had control of the legislature for decades to come. The League's brief in this case argues that partisan gerrymandering violates the First Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. A decision in Gill v. Whitford would set a standard for determining partisan gerrymandering. This could launch another round of redistricting court challenges around the country, and it will most definitely have an impact on how maps are drawn in the next round of redistricting, which starts after the 2020 census. Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments on a different partisan gerrymandering case out of Maryland, and the League was a speaker at a rally in front of the court. We think that a decision in both cases will be announced together. And since the court holds the biggest decisions for last, those decisions will probably come out in June of this year. Husted versus APRI is another case where the League has an amicus brief at the Supreme Court. This case is a challenge to the process that Ohio uses to purge voters from their registration list. The League's amicus argues that the Ohio process is illegal, inaccurate, and unreasonable under the provisions established in Section 8 of the National Voter Registration Act. The decision by the court in this case will change voter purge methods across the country. A wrong decision would open up egregious purging across the country and could make it so that thousands, if not millions, of voters are unable to vote in the 2018 election. A good decision would be a victory for voters and the National Voter Registration Act. Finally, the League also has an amicus with the League of Women Voters of Minnesota and the Brennan Center in a case that challenges a Minnesota law which prohibits any political paraphernalia from being displayed in a polling location. The League believes that this law is necessary to protect voters from intimidation in polling places. Voters should have a safe, calm place to vote where they are free from outside influence, and that is what the amicus in this case argues. The League is also involved in other litigation around the country. We continue to challenge redistricting maps. In LWV-NC, that's LWV North Carolina versus Ruscio, that's a challenge to the North Carolina district map where we've seen a victory. The court found that the North Carolina maps were unconstitutional and ordered that the legislature redraw the maps. The decision in this case, although positive, is currently under a stay from the Supreme Court pending additional action. This is going to force North Carolina voters to undergo yet another election under an unconstitutional map. The Gilvey-Whitford decision could also have an impact on how this map moves forward. Another victory we've seen on redistricting is in LWV versus Pennsylvania. The League there won a challenge to the congressional districts drawn in that state. LWVPA and plaintiffs from every single congressional district successfully fought for new congressional maps in every district across the state. The new map is finalized and it will be implemented in time for the 2018 primary and general elections. It's a great victory. In Michigan, the League is also ramping up for another fight regarding partisan gerrymandering. Last summer, when the Pence-Kobach Election Integrity Commission was established, the League immediately jumped to act in states across the country. First, we filed records requests in all states where commissioners were election officials to stay ahead of the information being shared with them and also to potentially know about actions, any future actions or asks that the commission might make. In Indiana, Utah, and Texas, we filed suits against the Secretary of State in their official capacities. All of these states have laws that protect voter registration data, and the League's court actions argued that submission of the data would violate those laws. Our work in this area is essential to protecting voters and ensuring their privacy and protecting their right to vote. After the Commission's request for data was made public, there were numerous reports of voters voluntarily removing themselves from the voter rolls in order to maintain their privacy. The decision and the request for data by the Commission was essentially forcing people to vacate their right to vote. So the League believes that any commission established around voting rights should protect voters and work to guarantee their right to vote. The Commission should not be working to actively remove voters from the voting rolls. The League has also been working to challenge laws and action that would require documentary proof of citizenship on voter registration forms. In LWV versus Newby, the League is challenging a decision by the Executive Director of the Election Assistance Commission, or the EAC, to require documentary proof of citizenship on the federal voter registration form. The request to add this requirement originally came from Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, a familiar foe to the League. Documentary proof of citizenship violates the National Voter Registration Act. The NVRA was created to make it easier for Americans to register to vote. By requiring additional paperwork from voters to register, it creates a barrier or a hoop that voters must jump through in order to register. In Kansas, the League has been fighting the decision to require documentary proof of citizenship by Secretary Kobach. The Kansas League is doing an amazing amount of work on voter registration efforts. The decision by Secretary Kobach makes their job harder. They've challenged him in court in the case of LWV versus Kobach. Today, we have with us a special guest from Kansas, Marge Ahrens, the immediate past co-president of LWV Kansas. She joined the League at the age of 23 and has been a member in 4 states and 6 different communities. She has held various leadership positions at the local and state levels. Most recently, she testified in federal court in Kansas in the trial representing LWV Kansas. She is here today to share some of her story. Marge, go ahead.
Thank you so much. The League of Women Voters of Kansas has just been through a powerful experience testifying at a federal trial regarding the Kansas documentary proof of citizenship law requiring all voter registrants to prove citizenship when registering to vote. I want to tell you that when this law went into effect, it was passed in the Kansas legislature in 2011, it really knocked the League of Women Voters off its feet. It hit us right at our core. And I want to tell you about how we responded to it. The law is called the Kansas Secure and Fair Elections Act of 2011. We testified against it in the legislature. It was brought in by the Secretary of State, and it was really passed by both political parties. Certainly, both fear and hatred of the other were elements in the discussion about this law, or at least behind it. The law requires both government-issued photo ID and documentary proof of citizenship. It is, in fact, a direct threat to the mission of the League of Women Voters, to our history, and all we stand for. Immediately in 2012, just as the documentary proof of citizenship feature was going to be enacted, we realized that our volunteers could not accept, and we would not accept liability for copying documents of people who would be registering at our typical registration events. We also understood the confusion, the complexity that these laws would produce for thousands of persons. And in fact, the results of that are clear, and I'll talk to you about those in a moment. But because our mission still remained clear to educate voters, we printed an educational flyer. That was our first effort, and sent it in thousands to libraries, community colleges, and other schools across the country so that people could read what they would have to do in order to both vote and in order to register to vote. We testified repeatedly. We were given only a few weeks preparation to understand that the Secretary of State was going to try to do rulemaking and create a 90-day rule, meaning that if you didn't complete your registration with your proof of citizenship within 90 days, your registration would be completely canceled. He succeeded in passing that rule because he had the right and the power. At about that point, the ACLU came to us and offered to provide counsel and file suit involving the DMV registrants under Motor Voter of the National Voter Registration Act. We then began purchasing, sorting, and publishing what are called suspense lists or incomplete voter registration lists. At the time of the 90-day rule, we believe the Secretary of State was somewhat embarrassed. 36,000 people had tried to register to vote and had not completed them, 87% of them because they had not brought in proof of citizenship. So you can understand his motivation to cancel their registration completely. So we purchased the suspense lists. We tried to work the lists, which we found to be nearly impossible. And then we purchased and analyzed voter registration lists for those who were to determine who was canceled. We published the lists, we broke them down by county, published them on our website, and sent them out in press releases with people's names for incomplete voter registrations to some of the smallest communities across the state. We reported the number of people we thought had been canceled through our analysis. And at one point it was 22,000 people. And we made fun of it a bit by calling them lost souls, or said they had rested in peace, and it made for very good press. We created an education module. We only had a 10-hour-a-week college intern. We had no staff. She was very good at putting together a video in English and Spanish directed at new voters and how to register to vote under this so-called SAFE Act. Finally, there was a preliminary injunction, and it allowed us to fully start again with voter registration, and that wasn't until June 2016. So you see, we're talking about 7 years, actually 4 leadership teams for the State League that have worked through this really onerous legislation. On March 7th, so just this past month, I experienced the honor of representing the League, the 1,000 members of the League of Women Voters of Kansas, against the Kansas Secretary of State. I spoke our story and experience of the burden of the law on us and all of those we attempt to help register, which have been mentioned by earlier presenters. The last statement we made, or that I made, was that we had learned from the ground that the Secretary of State, although under an injunction to engage those persons who had registered to vote at the DMV but had not supplied proof of citizenship, that his office had not sent out a postcard telling them where to vote. So they had registered, they'd received a letter they were registered under the injunction, but they didn't know where to register, and they were told to either go online or call their local election official. That postcard issue mentioned on the stand led to a possible contempt of court. The hearing was the next day after the end of the trial. We don't have a decision on that issue. The case is historic, and it is pervasive regarding evidence of non-citizens voting. Keep that in mind. It's really extraordinary. It's a historic challenge to voter suppression. We hope the decision will be made by Judge Julia Robertson in the Kansas City Federal Court we hope it will be in June. Now, what's so special about the League of Women Voters that we were able to make this kind of an impact? Well, first of all, we don't quit. We remain true to our principles and mission. We are nonpartisan, and everybody knows it. We know that we address policies and not personalities. And so while everyone across the nation, I don't want to say everyone, but most people across the nation were using the name of our Secretary of State, we did not use his name anywhere in the press or on our websites. We were determined to keep the policy at the forefront, and we were determined to try to protect the vote for all. We continued with our education no matter what, and about following the rule of law and complying even though it was most unhappy for all of us. We became friends with the local press and in the end with the national press. And we formed a very strong partnership with the ACLU. They represented us brilliantly. We had 18 members of their legal team in the courtroom with us. And we continued to testify in the state legislature over rulemaking and more restrictive legislation, which the Secretary of State tried again and again in the legislature last year. That's the story of the Kansas League. We are so very proud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marge, for your work and the work of the LWV in Kansas. Your persistence to protect voters of Kansas is so important, and the lawsuit you're involved in is precedent-setting. We appreciate everything you're doing to knock down the barriers that are preventing people from registering and being a part of the political process in Kansas. I want to move on a little and talk a little not just about the work that is being accomplished in courtrooms across the country. At the state and federal level, the League has been working to advocate for the issues that make up our Making Democracy Work campaign. Those issues include reforming the ways district maps are drawn by lobbying for state legislation that improves the redistricting process, and supporting citizen-led ballot initiatives that support reform with regards to redistricting. We're also supporting legislation that creates public financing systems that would increase the impact of small donors. We're expanding disclosure requirements and working to define what coordination means between candidates and the super PACs that support their campaigns. We continue to push pro-voter reforms like automatic registration, online registration, early voting, and same-day registration in states across the country. And we're supporting the Automatic Voter Registration Act of 2017 in Congress. We're also keeping an eye out for opportunities for action on other issues and legislation like the DREAM Act, the Affordable Care Act, and efforts to curb gun violence and climate change. We're also thinking of ways that we can ensure that the census has a complete count. This week, the Commerce Secretary sent the questions that will be included in the U.S. Census to Congress. Unfortunately, a question regarding citizenship status was included. The League is opposed to this question because it will damage the chances for an accurate count of our country's population. While most people think about the impact that census data has on reapportionment and redistricting, they often forget that the census collects information about the geographic distribution of our population, so we can also invest in our communities equitably. Adding this question to the census now is not only unnecessary, but it jeopardizes the accuracy of the report. And it comes at a huge financial expense to our communities. The League will work to ensure that this question is not on the final census by calling on Congress to take legislative action and by supporting different litigation efforts across the country. In addition to working on the questions, the League has also been urging Congress to fully fund the census. Last week's final omnibus appropriations bill included funding for the census, which is a step in the right direction. And state and local leagues are involved in complete count committees in their communities that will work to ensure that everyone is counted. Finally, I want to mention the scariest issue that no one is talking about. In states around the country, there is a movement to pass resolutions that call for a constitutional convention under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. This movement is led by special interests, and it's designed to limit freedoms and protections. Proponents are very close to moving a measure forward. They have 28 of the 34 states needed to pass a resolution. If this moves to Congress, there are no rules regarding the governance of a convention, the selection of its delegates, or even the issues it will need to consider. The last convention that was called was done to tweak the Articles of Confederation, and we ended up getting a whole new constitution. Leagues have been testifying in states like Hawaii, Maryland, South Carolina, Virginia, Arizona, and Texas to stop this effort from moving forward. The League's work is broad and constantly growing and changing. Our advocacy is multi-pronged and multi-issued. We continue to fight for the rights of voters to participate in our democracy and break down barriers that prevent them from being a part of the process. Before I turn it over to Kim, I want to remind you to email questions to Emily Yost at EY@lwv.org, or use the question function in the webinar software. We may have time for some questions at the end. With that, I'll hand it over to Kim. Kim Loth is a member of the LWV Board of Directors and chair of the Development Committee. She is a fundraising and nonprofit expert, as well as a local and state LWV leader from Tennessee. She will explain more about how you can support our work. Kim.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to get to be on the call today, and we thank all of you for participating. It's so important to get these updates and to hear from our stellar national staff and our amazing volunteers. I was especially excited to hear from my friends in Kansas who have done such an amazing job, and I'm really, really proud of the work being done there. People who know me often ask why I became involved with the League of Women Voters. I'm really not known for being a political creature, but I am someone who really cares about social justice. And I want to make sure that in my community, my state, and my country, that everyone has the opportunity to vote and participate so that our government reflects the values of our communities. I think that's so important. And I think the work of the League helps to make that happen. We also heard today, again, hearing from Kansas about the work that they did and how they really focused on civil discourse and making sure that the conversations were productive and nonpartisan. Again, at this stage in our country, we really need this, and we're seeing as we approach the midterm elections, it becomes more and more important that people are open to hearing all sides and communicating in a respectful and productive manner. As was mentioned, I'm a nonprofit fundraiser, and people often equate that with begging for charity, and that certainly couldn't be further from the truth. I never feel like I'm begging for the League. I feel like I'm facilitating investment in our work, and today we're facilitating investment in our work to ensure that Making Democracy Work campaign. So we want to encourage folks to give at the local league level and at the state league level as well. I do, and I'd like to invite you to also join me today in becoming a leader for democracy and considering a gift to the League of Women Voters of the U.S. of $1,000 or more. It can be really simple to make this gift. You can make a monthly gift of $83. But what I find that my work at the League is important, and my investment in the League is important, and every dollar goes incredibly far. You're going to get a follow-up email from Emily Yost with details on how to give. But thank you again for joining us. Thank you for caring about your community, your state, and our country. We really need all of you out there, and we look forward to seeing what we can accomplish together.
Thank you so much, Kim. There are some other ways that you can also get involved with the League. First, of course, by joining your local league. You can also go to our website and find a local league around you if you are not sure where one is. You can also go to our website and sign up for our email news and our action alerts that we send out, urging people to take action on in Congress or in other areas of the country. You can become a poll worker or a poll watcher for 2018. There are polls around the country who need help to administer elections to voters, and that is a worthy opportunity, usually managed through your local or state election board. You can follow and share LWV and Vote 411 on social media. We have Twitter accounts, we have Facebook accounts, and I think we also have an Instagram account. You can encourage your candidates in your neighborhood to use Vote 411. As Maggie stated, we have an unprecedented level of candidate information available on Vote 411 this year, and we would love to have as many candidates participating as possible. So please make sure to encourage your state, local, and federal legislators to participate. Finally, you can support us philanthropically by becoming a leader for democracy. And if you want more information on that program, you can contact Emily Yost at EYOST@lwv.org. With that, I think we have a time for a few questions. And the first question is from Rosario in Nevada, and it is for Maggie. And Maggie, Rosario is asking, what can I do to encourage people to vote?
That's a great question. Thanks, Jessica and Rosario. Certainly, we know that the personal act of asking someone to register and become a voter is critically important. So even as you see groups like us out there, even as you see celebrities talking about voting, all the research shows us that personal asking someone in your life if they're registered or if their registration is up to date, if they've moved recently, is critically important to their success. We also know that talking about voting as something that you're joining together in, something positive, join me in coming to the polls, become a voter with me. It's really important. This matters a lot because of XYZ going on in our community and in our country. And we also know that many, many things affect people's ability to vote, as you've just heard. The folks in Kansas, as Marge so eloquently and infuriatingly at times laid out for us, voters have to go through many, many hurdles in some places. And even where there aren't issues as difficult as the Kansas situation going on, you still need a lot of information in order to get registered, learn who's on your ballot, and actually make it to the polls on election day. So all the more reason why tools like Vote 411 are so important, why sharing that information with your networks when you see it, making sure you're sharing information that's up to date and trustworthy from a group like the League that you know and trust is so critically important. It's not simple disinterest or an apathetic attitude that keeps people from the ballot box. It's many, many barriers, information and downright insidious activity in some states, unfortunately. So we can all be part of helping to overcome that by asking the people in our lives to get registered and vote.
Great, thanks, Maggie. We received a few questions about the Constitutional Convention. One of the questions was, what are some of the groups that are promoting the Constitutional Convention? In particular is the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, and then the Koch brothers have also put some money into this effort. On our side, opposing it are groups like Common Cause. I know someone had asked if we work with Common Cause. We work with them on various issues. We also work for the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. It's a complicated issue, and for anyone who's interested in talking more about it in depth, I'm happy to take some more questions offline. But there are a couple of different ways that people are pursuing this. The first, the one that has 28 out of 34 states is around a ballot and budget amendment. But of course, there are no rules saying they have to stick to a balanced budget amendment once they get to a constitutional convention. So it would certainly is an issue that would throw our country into great chaos and turmoil, more so than I think some of our government already is. So it's one we're watching very closely. Our targets are constantly changing, but we're grateful for those leagues who have been involved in efforts in states around the country. Our next question comes from Marcia, and Marcia is wondering, is anything being done to re-enfranchise prisoners while in prison or when released? Every state has different rules on felon re-enfranchisement. There is a very active and successful campaign going on in Florida right now, working to put a ballot initiative on the ballot and establish a better system for re-enfranchising felons so that they can vote, and re-enfranchising prisoners so that they can vote. And so that is a place where I would look. And there are some other efforts going on around the country. There are just, every state's laws are different. So there are different campaigns in every state. Do we have any other questions? No, I think that's it. If you had a question and didn't get answered, we'll be sure to follow up. but we do appreciate everyone taking the time today. Please get involved with the League, and you can start by visiting lwv.org and finding out some more information about the work that we're doing. We'll be sure to send this recording of the webinar around in a follow-up email. We do appreciate your support, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much.